Hello and welcome, another great Thursday. I'm Anne Diamond here on Viking.TV, and today I'd love you to hear the amazing story of an absolute enigma, one of the best in history. An enigma is someone, apparently, or something that's puzzling, mysterious, or difficult to make sense of. It derives from the ancient Greek enigma, meaning speaking in riddles, and thus utterly perplexing to those who don't know the code. Well, today I want to introduce you to someone who can tell us all about the Enigma machine, the top secret coding machine that was so brilliantly designed and engineered during the Second World War by the Germans so that the Nazi High Command could send messages to their troops all over their occupied world without fear of being understood. Now, it should have confounded the Allies, but ultimately and brilliantly, we now know, it didn't. We found a way to beat it, and that story of outwitting the Enigma machine has become a wartime classic. We now know that the code breaking was done in a place called Bletchley Park, often hailed as the birthplace of the modern computer, and where the genius Alan Turing historically broke that code. But where is Bletchley Park? Who was there at the time? How did they assemble the sheer brain power that ultimately prevailed? We now know the story of that one man whose name is posthumously celebrated, Alan Turing. But there were others too, whose stories are amazing and groundbreaking, and that's why it's such a thrill to meet someone who can tell us all about it and who is one of Viking's most special on-board lecturers. And I was very lucky to meet him on board, John Chapman. Well, John, then, welcome to Viking TV. It's brilliant to be able to talk to you. I love your tie. I've only just noticed your tie. It's in code.
It is.
We'll have a good look at that later on and you can explain what it means. But I mean, we're talking about code when we talk about Bletchley. There may be a lot of people watching who really don't know what Bletchley Park's all about. How do you even start the Bletchley Park story?
Oh gosh, where do you start? You start with World War II, and you start with the beginning of World War II. And code breaking, of course, goes back, and goes back to Anne, the Queen Anne, I should say. But with World War II, the Germans, it was obvious that the Germans were going to attack. And the conference and the International Centre were looking at ways to develop the codes and ciphers. But they had to get out of London. And London was a danger area, and everybody knew it was going to be a danger area. So they started looking around, and Bletchley Park literally started from that. It came up for sale.
It was a big country house.
It was a great big house, still is. It still has 30 rooms upstairs, and the house has been kept in exceptionally good condition. So they started looking around, and Captain Ridley's shooting party, which was an excuse to go to Bletchley because it had come on the market. And it had come on the market and went to auction and didn't sell at auction, and a local builder bought it. But of course, he was buying it to develop it, to knock the house down, move it brick by brick to the front of the lake, which is the other side of the house in front of it, and then rebuild this wonderful mansion. And Admiral Sinclair turned up from Secret Intelligence Services and said, look, we may be all speaking German in a few years' time, so I have two choices. You can give me, let me buy the mansion off of you at the same price that you bought it at auction, or we will compulsory purchase. Which would you prefer? And he said, all right, well, you can have it. Well, as it was, that particular builder was able to do all the building work as Bletchley Park developed. So when the hundreds and hundreds of huts there, he got the building work.
Yeah, he got a good ongoing job out of it.
He did very good out of it. He
Yeah.
did very well out of it, exceptionally well. So Admiral Sinclair bought it out of his own money. There was no budget in the intelligence services for Bletchley Park or to purchase a place outside London.
So what year are we talking about? Are we talking about 1939 or well before that?
Just before. So we're talking 38 coming into 39. So they technically purchased it in 38, but started moving in 39.
And at that time, did our intelligence services already know that the Germans, the Nazis, were talking to each other in code?
Yes. A chap by the name of Dilwyn Knox, the Mad Welshman they called him, he was a tremendous code breaker. He knew of the Enigma machine. The Enigma machine was built by a company called Sherbius from a Dutch machine. The Dutch invented a type of Enigma machine. It wasn't the Germans, it was the Dutch, but they didn't protect it in World War I. They didn't patent it. So therefore, in comes the Germans who took it over for business use. So they were using code machines similar to Enigma machine, but not quite the same. Then the Nazis then took it over and developed it into the military machine that we knew of then. And the Polish contacted the British and the French and said, look, we are going to give you an Enigma machine's secrets and how and the problems with it, because the Enigma machine wasn't perfect. There were certain problems which the Polish, thank the Lord, found and were able to develop.
Now, the Enigma machine is a machine that encrypts the message, and we'll have a look at the machine in a minute.
Yes.
But so the Germans were doing it, but I presume we were doing that sort of thing too.
Well, we had our own Type X machine, so we had a code machine. The Enigma machine started with a 3-wheel machine, which when we look at it, I can explain that to you. But the British had 9 wheels, so we had a different code machine. Now intelligence services always boasted that no one ever broke it, which is not quite right, but then you've got to say that. And so the Germans' intelligence machine, code machine, you're perfectly correct, it wasn't a radio or a machine for sending anything, it was just a code machine. They had to use Morse by the side of it, so there was a group of operators that were literally moving the signal once it was encoded onto the Morse machine, which was then sent. And then at the other end was a replica machine set exactly the same. So as they put in the code that's gone, it then brings it back to plain German, not English, German. And of course we were then the people
able
that
to translate it. Yeah.
And when they came in 38 really, there was probably only about 130 or so.
Well, that was my next question. So in 1938, your Admiral has got the house and he thinks this is a good place to put the brains of Britain and the Allies, who can hopefully decode Enigma.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Who were they? Who were these characters?
Well, they were all kinds of people, but mainly working in codes and ciphers at the beginning, because that's where they came from. So they were already working in room 30 in the Admiralty, which is where the Code and Cipher School was. And it was called the Government Code and Cipher School, whereas now it's called GCHQ. You got it, which is slightly different, but the same. So 130 of them turned up, but by the end of the war, 10,000 working there.
What? 10,000?
Over 10,000. Over 12,500 had passed through the doors. And when we say 10,000, of course, that's including the outstations. So the stations that are around the country bringing the messages into Bletchley Park for the code breakers to decode. So you've got people out there, and then at the end of the war, you've got 3 shifts. You've got 3 8-hour shifts, basically, although there was a changeover, and then a rest shift. And there may have been a holiday shift. So you can bring it down in numbers to possibly 1,000 or 1,500 or whatever.
But as the numbers expanded during the war, I guess, what sort of characters came in? They weren't just all professional code breakers, were they?
No, they weren't. They were all kinds of people. One lovely lady who I met in 1996, Jean Rook, as her name was, as her maiden name. She was sitting there, and someone said she's doing a crossword. That's how they brought her in, and I went and had a chat with her. I said, a crossword? She said, well, yes, I used to do the Times and Telegraph crossword, and they'd obviously checked records and found all us people that got them right, and then contacted us and brought us in because of our quirky minds. So we just look at things from a different angle. And so she's well in her 70s. She died 4 years ago, sadly, and she literally, I said, you know, and you still do crossword? Oh yes, I'm not as fast as I used to be. I used to be able to do the Times in about 27 minutes. It takes me 32 minutes now. I can't even get the first question right in 32 minutes. Amazing characters,
and
phenomenal.
This is the sort of people they started to look for, as you said, people with quirky minds, people, we call them lateral thinkers now, or people who are just good at numbers and words.
Partly, but you also need the translators, because you also got to look in terms of German, Italians, Japanese, and Japanese is not just the similar 26 characters of an alphabet. There's 95 characters in Japanese as opposed to 26 letters of our alphabet, and similar with the Germans. And they've got 3 different dialects. So you've got the Japanese speakers, the Italian speakers, and various other languages, because you need to know what's going on with all the others. So there were linguists and what have you, and ladies that dined, that lived in Germany and lived and done finishing schools in France. All those kind of people were brought in, and so you had a whole dialogue of people, from, you know, someone who swept the floor who just happened to be very clever with numbers, to someone that went to balls every week. So there was quite...
To somebody with many degrees and had been to the best universities in the world.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, we know the story now of Alan Turing, who was, well, basically hailed now as being such a genius. But he wasn't the only one, was he?
Far from it. Alan Turing was probably one of the top 60. It's very difficult to look at. Obviously, he's been recognised because he was gay and because of the tragedy that occurred when he
was treated very badly after
absolutely
the war.
Right. And that's been put right to a certain extent. Not that you can ever put that right. With Gordon Brown giving him a pardon, thanks to Baroness Trumpington, the House of Lords, pushing that through with the help of Bletchley Park and many, many others.
Well, tell us that story, actually, because he was one of your quirky individuals, very, very clever man, and he invented the bomb machine?
He and his team, it was the Turing Welshman bomb machine, and it was those fellas that invented it. The film The Imitation Game is a lovely film, and compared to most military films and most war films, it's not 10% accurate, it's more like 80% accurate, and they've tweaked it a little bit because of the stories. Turing, of course, was a quirky fellow. He used to cycle with a gas mask on. And people thought he was completely mad. Well, he wasn't. He had hay fever and suffered badly with hay fever, and therefore he had a gas mask which relieved him from hay fever. Nothing more than that. But he was quirky, but he didn't...
Isn't it said that he buried some jewellery or rings or gold?
It is. And he and another fella decided, it's written that they decided they would bury some of their wealth in silver ingots, really. We have had a few false trails and had diggers digging up.
It's meant to be buried somewhere in the grounds of Bletchley.
Yeah. And of course then the grounds were 57 acres and more. Now we only have 27 acres left, although that's quite a big area. And we have dug up a few areas through false leads, and basically the answer is it's a no-no. It's one of those stories that's perpetrated, just like other stories with Churchill and people like that are just expanded and blow out of all proportion. So it's not quite right.
So go back to the bomb machine, because it certainly in the movie it was, well, several rooms full or huts full of rotating dials and discs and cylinders, and I mean it was the mechanical version of what we now accept as a digital thing.
Absolutely right. The bomb machine was a precursor, if you like, of the first electronic computer, which was also built at Bletchley Park. But it was derived from a bomba, B-O-M-B-A, which the Polish passed to the British in a forest just outside Warsaw called the Pyro Forest. And that was with the secrets, as they said, that they'd undertook and worked out with the Enigma machine. So once they passed that information over, Turing and his team, Welshmen as much as Turing, then took that information and decided they needed to move it into an electronic machine so it could be much more faster, 90 times faster, and 33 Enigma machines on one bomb machine. So there were 3 rows of 11 Enigma machines, if you like, but rotating at 60 rotations per second.
And they worked at it for, well, years, was it, before it worked?
Yes, I mean, yes, to be fair, they did, but they got it working and moving, and by the end of it, we had something like 200 bomb machines at Ruislip, Eastcote, and all kinds of different areas around London, and the Americans followed up with just as many of their own bomb machines, which were very similar to ours, because Turing went over to help the Americans, and we worked closely with the Americans.
During the war?
During the war, oh yes, during that period in the war, 43, he was over there helping them, as was Dilwyn Knox, who run the department, and had a wonderful lady with him, Mavis Lever, her maiden name. Mavis Beatty was her married name, who literally, effectively put the Italians out of World War II by breaking a code, and she was 19.
Gosh.
So youngsters as well were really coming in and were phenomenal minds.
And you've met quite a few of them, haven't you? These amazing ladies of Bletchley Park.
I've fallen in love with so many of them because of their stories, and they wouldn't talk, they wouldn't tell. And 2 of them we interviewed. One was Lady Jean Ford of the Isle of Arran, whose family had to sell off the castle and a lot of the islands of the Isle of Arran through death duties. And when I contacted her, because someone tipped me the wink, it was a Mason who said you really need to read this lady's book up in the Isle of Arran, and there's a couple of paragraphs on Bletchley Park which no one knew that she worked there. So they took me, and Bletchley Park said, yes, you can go and interview, you're going up that way, that saves us an awful lot of money, that's great, take the TV camera, take the video and the recorder and all the things, and take the spec, but also take your dear lady. And I said, Why? Well, because you'll talk her to death, and at least your Lady Anne will stop her. So, of course, I had to take Anne along.
Well, she must have signed the Official Secrets Act,
did.
as they all did,
Yeah.
which stopped, and they took it very seriously indeed.
Absolutely.
So it stopped them from ever really talking about what they did.
Absolutely.
Did she open up to you about what she did actually do at
She told
Bletchley?
some lovely stories and things that she did. She was a cleric to a certain extent. She was a sickly lady, this particular lady, Jean Ford, and her parents, who knew Mountbatten, said, look, we need her to she wants to get into the war effort in some way. Is there somewhere safe? And because of her intelligence, she narrowed it down to interviews and what have you. And Mountbatten certainly, not a lot, but a little, got her in, and she was taken into Bletchley Park. And because of the clerical work, she said at some stage, I'd really like to do something different. And she became the billeting officer. So this is a 19-year-old going and knocking on people's doors and saying, look, you've got 3 bedrooms, your husband's away at war, we need at least 2 of your rooms to billet people. We can't tell you what they do, you mustn't talk to them, but they billet. And no one was billeted at Bletchley Park. Everyone that worked there was billeted around.
Outside?
Yeah, Woburn
Really?
Abbey had mainly Wrens, and Woburn Abbey
That's
had
the women's working in the Royal Naval
Women's
Service.
Royal Naval
Yeah.
Service, yes, sorry. So they had many Wrens, which was really good, and they worked there. And the WAFs, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, were up at Shenley, just a few miles up the road, in a billet. Which was quite
All
something.
of those people being taken in, some of them quirky, as you said, from unusual backgrounds, but clearly somebody thought they've got the brains that we need. They must have been vetted so carefully, because they could have been anyone.
Yes.
I mean, obviously the movie it hints that there was a spy problem. Was there?
Well, yes and no. The thing with spies, and the intelligence services won't admit to this, but if you've got a spy, you can keep your spy, because your spy is very useful. So what you do is you feed your spy the information you want them to know, and that works so many times. Okay, there are times when the intelligence services pretend that they perhaps knew they had a spy and they didn't, and of course they try and just save face. But at Bletchley Park, to a certain extent, there was a little bit of information that was let loose and let out. But to answer your initial question, yes, they did vet people, but they could only go so far. They don't have the checking facilities that we have now. We can check within seconds someone's history and go way back.
And they needed to recruit fast,
Absolutely,
too, didn't they?
absolutely. Well, they did and they didn't, because recruitment was building up and building up and building up. As things were learnt, people were brought in. So they were recruiting fast, but they were also recruiting steadily. And over the years, some only joined in 1944 because they came of age and they'd been trained in certain areas. So they moved them in, and it worked out quite well.
Tell us what happened to Alan Turing.
Well, Alan Turing moved into experiments. He was doing experiments on a numbers game. Even to this day, the Turing test for the computer is called the Turing test, and it's what Alan Turing had written as the test for the computer. He moved into working with numbers. He even
Sorry,
worked...
what is the Turing test? What's it designed to do?
It's purely, well, you know now if you go onto something and they want to check that you're not a computer, pictures come up and you have to say which is a traffic light, and
yeah,
you pick
this
three.
is Are You a Robot?
That's
isn't
Turing.
It?
That's what he brought out.
Oh,
That's
really?
the kind of test it was.
It's
That's
a test
as
to
simple as
sort
that.
of design the basic intelligence between a human and the intelligence of a computer.
And the answer to
And
that
he
is you've cracked it, well done.
Yeah. And he designed that.
That's just basically.
That's the basic
where it came
idea.
from. The same as the
Yeah.
the Wi-Fi as we know it now, and the media.
Well, that's what we all hope, that we humans still pass the test.
Well,
don't
yes,
we?
yes. Well, whether we ever will, I don't know.
So, but after the war, what happened to him?
It was sad. He moved in working with Manchester University, and he moved into more experimentations. And of course, he was sidelined to a certain extent. And of course, the worst thing was he had an affair with a young man. And of course,
It was illegal in those days.
Yes, of course, and it was quite poorly looked at. He then complained because the young man had stolen from him. When the police came, they were more interested in the fact that the young man had slept there the night before and what was going on, as opposed to what was stolen. And of course, that just took him in, and in the end, he was taken to court, and he was found guilty, and he was offered 2 choices. He was offered imprisonment, which he couldn't take, or chemical castration, which he took, which is frightening.
And ultimately, we don't know. Some think that he took his own life.
Yes.
We don't know whether that's real or not, do we?
No, his mother always swore that he would never have taken his own life. She proved with his diaries, and his nephew, even to this day, has written a number of books. The Turing books are really good, and has tried, and they've tried to prove. His mother always said, look, he had diary notes for things that were very important to him, the following day. So therefore he couldn't have taken his life. But of course the answer was that he was experimenting, and therefore the chemicals he was experimenting with,
which included cyanide.
which was cyanide, basically. It got on his fingers, got on an apple, he'd taken a bite out of an apple. And of course, we for many years at Bletchley Park, trying to survive and save Bletchley Park to the nation, always said to Apple themselves, you know, that's your logo. Surely that's linked with Alan Turing and Bletchley Park. And
yes.
they said no. It just happens to be
it's
our logo.
It's a very unfortunate link,
yeah.
though, isn't
and
it?
we tried so hard to get them to say, well, okay, there's a little bit, but we didn't get away with that,
yeah.
which is a shame.
Well, in those days, I mean, it was a struggle for Bletchley Park to keep going, but it's celebrated now, isn't it?
It is. Apart from COVID, and COVID hit Bletchley Park hard, but like most of the top museums, the government stepped in and were able to help them a little bit. But Bletchley Park had to lay off an awful lot of very good paid employees and lose an awful lot of, and we've always had a couple of hundred volunteers, like myself, because I'm just a volunteer. So, you know, Bletchley Park will come down on me hard if I get anything wrong, and if you ask too difficult questions, I shall be shocked.
Well, you've brought with you an Enigma machine. Can we have a look at it?
Yes.
And you can explain, or at least as far as we can understand, what it does?
Yes.
Let's have a look.
Yes, okay.
I mean, this is really exciting. I know this is a replica because they wouldn't let you bring in the real thing, but this is what they look like, and they look like then. Can you explain what they do, how it works?
Very basically, it's like a portable typewriter. I have to be careful because when I'm talking to youngsters, they look at me as if to say, what is a portable typewriter?
Yes.
And I have to explain, this is rather like the keyboard of your laptop. So you've got the QWERTY board here, which is where the lights come up, and you've got a repeat here, which is what you press down. So if, for example, you press down E, a light will come up like T, randomly, any letter, except it will never, and this is where the Polish came in, they told the British and the French that it would never encrypt its own letter. So an E would never bring up an E, and a Q would never bring up a Q.
So if I were writing the word Anne, I would do it, press the A, and whatever something else might, like, say a Z would light up, a Z, then N.
Yeah, you got it.
N.
That's it.
Now that might light up with a W.
Yeah, and then you press
and then I
press
the second time, but the W wouldn't light up again.
No.
Because by now it has gone on to something else, and it might light up a B.
Yeah.
And then the E,
you've got it.
would be again something else.
That's right.
So it wasn't just that that encryption was actually quite complicated because it would change if you needed the same letter twice.
And the reason it was complicated is because when you press a button, a little electric signal will go through up round the machine into these, which is what we call the wheels. It will go through there into, if you like, a reflector, which would send it back, come back here, but back on the return journey to the light. So as it came through and went through here, these three wheels, and they were taken out of a set of 5 wheels, these 3 wheels, the first wheel would move once. And then when you press another button, the second, your letter N in Anne, the first wheel would move once again, changing all the combinations. Then the third letter, another N, the first wheel would move once. When that wheel's moved 26 times, the second wheel moves once. So when you've got 26 and then another 26, the third wheel moves once. So you've now got 26 and 26 and 26. But of course, so that's, if you like, to work out the calculations, that's 26 to the power of 26 to the power of 26, which is, I'll tell you, because there's more. What you've also got a plug board in the front, or the Germans would call it a Steger board. Now there's 26 letters there, but the Germans, of course, are saying, well, we can't keep this 26 calculation the same, we must change it. So there would be 10 of the letters here plugged into 10, so they wouldn't plug all 26. They wouldn't plug 13 into 13. So therefore you've got 10, but you've still got to calculate another 26. Of course, making it more complicated, every day you've got a set, you've got 5 wheels. So each day you might use wheel 1, 2, 3, and then the next day you might use wheel 2, 1 and 3, or 3, 2 and 1, or 4, 1 and 5. So you've got a combination of 5 to the power of 5 to the power of 5 again, but of course each letter has got 26 letters on it. So then you've got 26 times 26 times 26. So you can imagine all that adds up to 1,753. The chance of breaking that is just under 147 million to 1. So of course the Germans were convinced And Admiral Dönitz, who took over from Hitler at the end of the war, and of course was the submarine commander, Admiral Dönitz said there's no way you could have broken it. And it wasn't until after the war, when he was actually debriefed to a certain extent, did he say, you did, and couldn't believe that the part did break.
I mean, hearing that figure, you start to understand why the bomb machine that Turin built was so enormous.
Yes.
Is it true that somewhere along the line, rather like finding the Rosetta Stone, there were the occasional words used that were always the same? I mean, for instance, I'm thinking of the word Heil Hitler, which apparently was used either at the beginning or at the end of most messages.
Absolutely right.
And the decoders started to realise that that was being used again and again and again, and it gave them some sort of way into the code?
It was. Three Polish mathematicians, Robolewski, Zagowski and Rejewski, came to Bletchley Park, didn't come to Bletchley Park, but gave Bletchley Park an Enigma machine in a forest in Pyro just outside Warsaw. And they said there are certain quirks. If you press an E, it will never encrypt an E. So there are every 26 times there will be an opportunity, because that will be a fault. They also said at the end of most messages, what you get is Heil Hitler. So therefore you've got a clue.
Yes.
At the start of messages, you also get sometimes the operator using his girlfriend's name as his startup. You're right, they could use Heil Hitler, but not often at the beginning. It'll always be, mostly be at the end. And they also realised that without breaking codes, they actually could work out what was going on without actually always succeeding in breaking codes. For example, German operators, they were always kept by the commanders. So therefore the German commanders would keep Karl or whatever, and keep a couple of signals, but they'd always use the same signalers. So their little traits of using their girlfriend's name or whatever. And also when you taught the Morse code, British were taught with like music. You'd have a clock. So your timing would be the same.
Yeah.
Whether it's dit, 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 da, 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 dit, 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 it would always be the same. But Germans were not quite the same teaching. And therefore sometimes some were always fast, some were always slow. And of course we also taught with what we call a cushion. So therefore your pressure, and the pressure could be told to a certain extent.
Goodness.
So therefore, and the Germans didn't know that. So you therefore knew if this German who he was, you'd say, well, hang on, we know that's Rommel's signaler. So we now know by taking a code and listening to it, listening to the signal, let's say in Dover, and then you take a bearing and you send that to Bletchley Park. You put the time, the date and the bearing, send it to Bletchley Park. It's there within hours. You then further round, let's say the Isle of Wight, another signal, take a bearing, same signal, same time, same date. Further round, a third bearing, down let's say in Devon or Cornwall, and that's trigonometry. So where the three are, you now know where Rommel is. Now, of course, if 2 days later Rommel's on the move, you've got him. If you haven't broken the signal, you now know Rommel's on the move. So if your spies have done their work right, you take out his fuel dump. You don't take it out if you know where his fuel dump is, of course. You don't take it out too early. You wait until it's too late and he's committed and he runs out of fuel.
Do you know, you have to have a brain the size of
right.
Mount Everest to understand all of that.
So often, so you could actually work out.
I'll hold that lid while you tell me about these pencils.
Well, this comes up in our talks on Viking on special operations, and the special operations executive would send people out in the field and they'd have a simple pencil. And here's a typical pencil here with a rubber and a top, and here's the pencil broken down. So when you look at this pencil here, it's a pencil, but it's got a map in it.
Oh,
and
my
there's
goodness.
the map in there. And also the other thing is at the bottom of this here, and it's not easy to show it, but let's see if we can do it for you. You can take this out, and here you've got a compass inside.
Inside where the eraser is.
So of course that is exactly it there from there. So there's the secrets, and there's the information that is there.
And weren't there also like silk handkerchiefs?
Well, I'm
with the
so
code
glad
on
you
them?
said that. I'm not a magician, but I just happen to have in my pocket. This is a code. So this is if you like, an operator's in the fields code. But it's on silk. Now this is not quite silk, it's linen, but it's on silk, and it's on silk because it's sewn in to the lining of your clothes, so that when a German operator or someone actually stops you and fleeces you...
Yeah, they sort of pat you down.
If it's paper, they're going to find it.
Yeah.
But if it's linen, they just see inside your linen, it's not there.
Well,
they don't see it. So this was important. This was handed to operators. So that was quite good. And of course, it's in code.
It's ingenious,
Which
isn't
is
it?
great, which is quite
Absolutely
fun.
ingenious. John, thank you so much for showing us that. Let's just fold that up again,
Okay, it's my pleasure.
because it's pretty amazing. The Enigma machine and all the work being done at Bletchley Churchill must have been very much involved in that. Was it one of his pet projects?
It was a project to a certain extent, in so much as he only really visited Bletchley Park once, and on that one occasion it was to thank them for what they'd done to that extent by that time during the war, and to encourage them, and more importantly to say as his parting shot, if there's anything you need, please let us know. And the chaps there immediately got together and put a wants list down and sent a letter which was delivered direct to 10 Downing Street to Churchill, and we have a part of the copy of his instruction where he stamped it action this day, and then which was normal for Churchill in certain areas, but what he did was he went one stage further and wrote underneath, see that this is done and report back to me when complete. In other words, that was absolutely critical. He had lots of other things that he was involved with, special operations executive and various others, that were still just as much his baby. And when you're running that kind of thing in that kind of state situation, you can't keep control of everything. So you have to rely on lines down the field and that report back up to you.
But he did love inventions and science, didn't he? He put a lot of faith in if you put enough money and research into something, you will find a solution.
Absolutely right. No, you can't argue with that. Churchill had ways of pushing things as well as brute force, because he was very brutal when it comes to getting his way, and that was him. And yes, he did, and to a certain extent, I don't have the experience to know all the other atmosphere, although in World War I he was very much involved in the development of the tank.
I gather.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, and that of course was important to him as well, this ship on the desert as they called it. And so therefore he was involved in the tank, and that's where lots of other things came up as
talk about quirkiness. He was a quirky one, wasn't it? Isn't it said that when he was in World War I, when he was fighting in the trenches, he still took a bath with him?
Yeah.
I mean, a proper old-fashioned enamel bath.
Yes.
He had, but he let other people use it. It wasn't for his exclusive use.
No. And with Viking, we went to the Western Front, and the Western Front is underground, and there's a bath there, and the story is that Churchill took a bath, and the girls next door were giggling because they could hear him splashing about. And that wasn't just his bath there. So yes, wherever he went, that was one of the quirky.
Of course, that always. I mean, any movie that's ever made about Churchill, they always have a bath scene, don't they?
They do.
Because he used to dictate letters from the bath. His secretaries used to sort of kneel on the floor outside the bathroom and take down notes. And
absolutely right.
He had a routine that he stuck to, which usually started with a strong whiskey very early in the morning.
Well, yes, in his younger days, he always said, I never drink alcohol before lunchtime. And then as he grew older, he then said, I never drink alcohol before breakfast. So the answer to your question is yes. And his alcohol bill for 1 year was phenomenal. And in one of our talks, which we talk about Churchill, we actually list his alcohol bill, which was phenomenal.
Phenomenal, even for those days.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Staggering.
Yes.
But I mean, in so many other ways, quirky as well. He was a difficult person to work for, he must have been. And yet people were so devoted to him.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, his fame endures.
Yes, that's so true. And his secretaries and the secretaries of his under-secretaries, so the young girls, as you said, who came up and took dictation and what have you, by the bed, he very rarely got up before 11 o'clock in the morning, and they would take dictation when he was in bed in his pyjamas, or his onesies, as he so often called them. But as years have gone by, that they've been interviewed, and there is that loyalty. There was that fear as well, and one of the scenes in one of the Churchill films of the young girl running out and Clementine, his wife, coming in and giving him a stiff talking to, was wonderful. And it was so true to life, really, I'm sure. But the secretaries were so devoted that they never, ever, in later life, in their 70s and 80s, was still giving great stories about him, and very honoured to have worked with him, which is wonderful.
And he was always fighting bankruptcy almost, wasn't he?
He used to be the worst gambler you could ever come across. Truman took more money off of Winston Churchill at poker than anybody else. And poor old Churchill had to sign away his memoirs and some of his books just to raise enough cash, which of course were turned into films, to raise enough cash so that he could actually pay off his debts. So yes, the answer to that is yes. But when you go to Chartwell and see where he lived in his latter life, phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And even to this day where he painted, and he did over 500 paintings, and there's still 100, maybe 150 that they haven't found under what his painting name was, Charles Moran. So if anybody's out there at car boot sales, look for Charles Moran and you could have a fortune.
Gosh, that's amazing, isn't it?
That's right. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, when they were married, bought one of his paintings for £2 million. And now what they did when they split, I don't know. They couldn't have cut the paint in half, but somehow they had to agree a split.
Yes, I think we'd all...
There's good money there.
We'd all love a Churchill painting.
Absolutely.
But why, what do you put that down to? I mean, I tend to think I like Churchill because he wasn't very good at school. He hated school. He missed his parents. He missed his mother, who, you know, was a socialite, an American socialite at that. She wasn't exactly the best mother in the world, but he loved her to bits. Yeah. He married for love, and it was an enduring marriage, even though he was difficult. Yeah. He loved his children, even though some of them were difficult too. He sort of succeeded, despite not being the perfect student, the perfect schoolboy. Right. Yes.
His head of year said that Churchill was the second most stupidest boy in Harrow, and the first was his brother. So, which was such a shame.
Yeah.
He got the Nobel Prize for Literature, and he wanted so desperately the Nobel Prize for Peace and didn't get it. But then he wasn't really a peacemaker. But having said all that, he was very good at literature. He was great on horseback and sword fencing. Those were only his three good things, really.
Did he take part on horseback in the last ever...
One of the last, if not the last, charges.
Charge,
Absolutely
where you
right.
actually rode on a horse and charged into
right.
battle.
Absolutely right. And he's thought of very well. In World War I, the Fusiliers, Scottish Fusiliers, thought he was their best commander they'd ever had, and felt he was amazing because he looked after the men. And that was the same in the Horse and Light. Where he was, although he did fall out with the sergeant, the horse sergeant. In the army, we call him regimental sergeant major. In the Air Force, it would be the warrant officer. But in the horse, it was the horse sergeant, and he fell out with the horse sergeant a number of times because he wanted to get involved so much with his men. And the horse sergeant said, "No, sir, you're an officer, you don't do that." And he told him off and pulled him up a number of times.
It was a remarkable life, wasn't it?
It was.
It really was. I mean, I think so many of us have seen in drama, but also in the news footage, when he was invited out onto the balcony on VE Day, when the King and Queen asked him to come out onto the balcony in front of all the crowds. And the biggest roar was for him, wasn't it?
Yes, and also on one of my lectures, the last lecture that I give invariably is on Churchill, we have a picture of him at the back as he is brought out, as the roar occurs, with two fingers up, giving the victory salute. It was, and there are people, when I gave the talk with Viking, Americans with tears in their eyes. Having said that, people, it was like Marmite, or if you're an Australian, Vegemite. You either loved him or hated him, and there was an awful lot of people that didn't like him. He made mistakes. I mean, Gallipoli was one, and various others, and he had a serious depression, which he called his black dog. So there were good and there were bad, and we need to understand some of it, but not all bad.
I know. The amazing historic footage of his funeral, and when his coffin is put on the barge going down the Thames, and all of the cranes bow. I gather the crane operators didn't want to do that because the crane operators were trades unionists. They didn't agree with him. And in the end, I think it was management who had to go in and operate the cranes so they could do that.
Well, I heard various stories on that. Yes, I think that was partly true. Yes, there were some that did, and there were others that felt they should participate. But yes, there were others that withdrew and said, well, if you don't pay us extra money, we're not doing it. So you've got lots of different stories on that. But the barge was the Havengore. And at Bletchley Park, we had a Churchill collection for 15, 20 years. And that's now at the Stratford-upon-Avon Armouries. And that tells wonderful stories about Churchill. And we had the Havengore Bell, which is now back on the Havengore because it's now a museum piece and still going to this day, 80 years later.
Well, listen, if he'd been angelic, he wouldn't be such an interesting person.
No, that's true.
And I know that you make the point that whenever a poll is done about who was the greatest living Briton,
yes,
he always comes out top.
He does. He does well. He lost once to Alan Turing, which was an interesting one. But that was when Turing was at his peak, and that was 2012, which was the centenary of Turing when they did the poll, and therefore it was obvious that he's likely to have won on that. But Churchill came out with some amazing bits and pieces. Lady Astor once said to him, "Mr. Churchill, if I was married to you, I'd poison your tea." And he said, "Madam, if I was married to you, I'd drink it." And they were so good. And some of the bits they do were really fun.
Oh, John, it's been brilliant to talk to you today. Thank you so much for showing me your Enigma machine and all those other little bits and pieces. Thank you very much indeed. It's been absolutely brilliant to meet you.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been fantastic to have you here on Viking.TV.
Thank you.
So there you are. I told you that one would be interesting. Do join me next week for another special Thursday interview here on Viking.TV. Until then, stay safe and well, won't you? Bye-bye.